I expected hot garbage, but what I got made me put my $200 Apex 5 controller back on the shelf. I spent years editing FPS trailers and testing hardware with the same no-nonsense approach. If it can't survive a real gaming session, I will call it out. So when I unboxed the $80 GAMESIR G7 Pro, I braced myself for disappointment. At this price point, something usually gives cheap buttons, weak triggers, or comfort that falls apart after an hour. But here's the surprise. This pad isn't just good for the money, it actually had me questioning why I ever paid more. Let's break down why. With the G7 Pro, I wasn't expecting the heavy premium feel of the Elite Series 2. I knew at this price point, weight would be one of the first compromises, but I was pleasantly surprised. The shell felt solid, the hand shaped natural, and nothing screamed budget knockoff. GAMESIR have a reputation for solid build quality, and this pad didn't betray that. The face buttons were the real surprise here. Unlike the squishy membrane buttons on most controllers in this bracket, the G7 Pro gives you micro switches with that clean, clicky tactile response. They're not quite as tight as the Apex 5, travel distance is a bit deeper, but they still feel sharp and durable. You actually believe they're going to last. Now, not everything hit the same high note. The D-pad, for example, is one of the biggest complaints floating around Reddit, and I get why. It's mechanical, it actuates fine, but the feel is just off. The way it's mounted with pins beneath gives it a sunken, plasticky press that never feels quite right. Not a deal breaker if you don't live on fighting games, still worth noting. One of my personal decisions was to go with the red to black fade instead of the white, because white controllers inevitably end up looking gritty. And with this one's rubberized grips, it's only a matter of time before dirt gets embedded. But that's a universal controller issue, not unique to GAMESIR, but still something that matters if you want your pad looking fresh all the time. But here's where the G7 Pro really earned my attention: the triggers and extra buttons. Just like the Apex 5, it adds 2 extra top triggers right beside the bumper, an ergonomic masterstroke. They're comfortable, quick to access, and in panic twitch moments, my brain started defaulting to them. Honestly, I'd argue they're more usable than 4 traditional back buttons. But great buttons are easy to fake out of the box. Most budget controllers crumble once you actually start pushing them in marathon sessions. So how did it hold up after 3-hour test runs? Here's where I thought the cracks would show. Most budget pads start strong and then fall apart when you actually sit down and play for long periods of time. And as a dad, 3 hours is about as long as I ever get on a Saturday morning before the house wakes up. So that's my stress test window. Overall, the G7 Pro did better than expected. The grips are rubberized and comfortable, though I'll be honest, the texture is shallow. After a while, sweat builds up and you do feel yourself losing a bit of grip. Nothing major, but enough to remind you that this isn't $200 of engineering. For $80 though, it's entirely forgivable. The bigger comfort issues came from the thumbstick. Specifically, my left thumb started to ache after a while from pushing forward and strafing. That pressure builds during FPS games until it feels like the stick is pushing back at you. It's not game-ending discomfort, but it is noticeable. Compare that to the softer yet firm sticks on the Apex 5 and the difference is obvious. In terms of responsiveness and dead zone feels though, they were flawless. But what I didn't encounter were the usual budget pitfalls. No mushy buttons after an hour, no flaking rubber, no wobbling triggers. Everything stayed consistent. The back buttons are a little sunken and not the most reactive in frantic moments, but they didn't collapse into uselessness either. If anything's going to wear down fastest, I'd bet on the bumpers. They feel a little membrane-like compared to the rest of the controller, but that's speculation, not failure. And here's the bigger point. During those long sessions, I never once thought, this is why I shouldn't have bought a budget controller. Instead, I thought, wow, this is comfortable enough and nothing's breaking, which in this price bracket is a massive win. But durability is only half the fight. The real secret weapon here is the software, and it's either the features that turn this into a sleeper hit or where everything falls flat. So this is where I had to double check myself. Shift layers, macro remaps, trigger tuning, all in an $80 controller? That's rare. Usually the software is where cheaper pads expose themselves, but not here. The GAMESIR software actually gives you full remap control, profile saving, and even lets you designate a shift button. Think of it like a function key on a keyboard. Hold down a chosen button and suddenly your face buttons all take on new roles. In practice, that means your controller basically doubles in capacity. The craziest part? You can link this to your stick sensitivity. Imagine running and gunning in a shooter with fast stick curves, then pressing your shift button before scoping in as a sniper, and suddenly your dead zones and curves switch to slow, precise movements. It's the kind of feature you'd expect on a high-end esports pad, not a sub $100 controller. Now, would I use it? Probably not. I'm a muscle memory gamer. I want my button layouts to stay the same across everything, because the second you start changing profiles per game, you lose that instinctual consistency. But the fact the option exists is huge, especially for players who do like tailoring their setup to specific roles. Add in dead zone control, anti-dead zones, trigger sensitivity adjustments, motion, gyro settings, it's all here. The one quirk? The report rate is defaulted lower than 1000 Hz, so you might have to go in and set it manually. And the software menu can feel a little clunky when you're diving between profiles and sub-menus. But it works, and that's the most important part. Comparisons: the Elite Series 2 has locked-in software that doesn't let you experiment much. The DualSense Edge charges $200 for 2 back paddles and a shallow remap layer. And the Fly Digi, that's got wild flexibility, but at a very expensive cost. The G7 Pro hits happy medium. Flexibility and features without costing a fortune. But none of this matters if the controller folds under pressure. So how did it actually perform in competitive matches? This was the ultimate test. I took the G7 Pro into PvP Destiny 2 and the Battlefield 6 beta, and even Ascendant, the FPS I'm helping develop. 3 very different games, but all requiring precision and comfort under pressure. Here's what stood out: I didn't miss the other controllers. That's the real measure of success. When I booted games up, I found myself instinctively reaching for the G7 Pro without thinking about it. That kind of subconscious preference tells you everything. You're comfortable, you trust it, and it worked. In Destiny 2, the back triggers made sliding, jumping, reloading, meleeing feel effortless. Battlefield 6, with its chaotic firefights, nothing jammed up or stuttered in my kill streak. And in Ascendant, where I spend my time helping the devs actually refine our controller sensitivities right now, the controller felt responsive and reliable. Now, I'll be honest, the wired-only setup didn't give me any noticeable advantage. Input felt tight, but in 2025, the difference between wired and modern wireless is so slim, most gamers won't notice. And if I'm choosing, I'd rather have the comfort of wireless plus a dock system like the Apex 5 includes. That dock not only charges, but hides the dongle neatly, reconnects instantly, and just makes life easier. And that's where premium still wins. Unless you're an Xbox user where you're forced to use it in wired only. And that's where I probably would give this controller a miss. But here is the kicker. I didn't think I'd miss my Apex 5 until I switched back. Only then did I notice that the softer, higher quality sticks, its cleaner D-pad and more responsive paddles, that's the reality you get, I suppose, when you pay for the top end. But at $80, the G7 Pro isn't trying to dethrone the Apex 5. It's trying to make you think twice about why you'd pay more. This isn't the best controller I've ever used, but it's definitely the best I've used under $100. And it's made me rethink how overpriced the premium options really are. If you want the pro feel without going broke, this controller is 100% the one. If there's one thing I care about, it's honesty. I've spent years editing trailers for shooters and making content that cuts through the fluff. And this controller got exactly the same treatment. It's not flawless, but for $80, it's very impressive. If you value honest takes like this, stick around. Like, sub, or don't. There's no pressure here. I'm just grateful for the view. But if you are interested in my review for the Apex 5, you can find that one by clicking here.